The stories told here are drawn from books, from real history, and from real human behavior. Names, places, and times shift across centuries, sometimes colliding by chance, sometimes echoing by fate. Any resemblance to persons living or dead is coincidence, not design. On this channel you will encounter kings and beggars, saints and traitors, heroes and monsters, because power wears every face.
I would not exchange the peace of my conscience for the empire of the world. Saladin. Rome, 185 BCE. The Senate chamber trembles with noise. Senators pound their fists, calling for blood. They demand the trial of a man they both envy and fear. Scipio Africanus, the great general who defeated Hannibal, the savior of Rome itself. But power breeds resentment. Rivals whisper that he has grown too rich, too arrogant, too untouchable. They want him humiliated. They want him dragged before them like a criminal, forced to answer their accusations. The crowd gathers. They wait for the spectacle, the mighty Scipio defending himself, raging at his enemies, clawing to preserve his glory. They imagine the drama, the fury, the fall. But Scipio never arrives. On the morning of the trial, he walks out of the city gates in silence. He does not argue. He does not explain. He does not beg. He leaves Rome altogether, retreating to his villa by the sea. And there, in disdainful silence, he lives the rest of his life. The Senate had prepared their stage, but the actor refused to perform, and so their fury collapsed into emptiness. History remembers Scipio as Rome's savior. His enemies are dust. His silence was louder than their accusations. This is the essence of Law 36. Disdain what you cannot have. Ignore what diminishes you, and you will wound deeper than any sword. Now, imagine standing in a crowded hall. Voices echo, accusations fly, whispers slither from mouth to ear. Someone hurls an insult at you, loud enough for the crowd to hear. You feel your heart pound. You feel the heat rising in your chest, of the urge to lash back, to defend yourself, to prove them wrong. This is the moment where most people fall. This is the moment where appetite betrays them. The appetite for a vindication, the appetite for possession, the appetite for control. And yet this is also the moment where the rare few rise. Law 36 is not about conquest. It is not about striking your enemy down in open battle. It's about the darker, colder discipline of walking away. About starving the insult, ignoring the bait, refusing to chase what is dangled just out of reach. It is a law that feels unnatural because everything in us screams for reaction. But consider this. Attention is fuel. Wherever it flows, things grow. And your enemies know this. They provoke, not because they can beat you, but because they want your gaze. They want you to acknowledge them. They want to borrow your stature to enlarge themselves. History is littered with the corpses of those who could not resist this temptation. Kings who pursued crowns they could never wear. Generals who answered insults that should have been ignored. Lovers who destroyed themselves chasing affections denied them. To crave what cannot be had is to make yourself small. To answer every whisper is to breathe life into rumor. To fight every battle is to reveal your insecurity. The discipline of disdain is not passive. It is active starvation. It is choosing to let silence do the killing. It is the art of appearing untouchable. Think of an emperor standing at the balcony. A beggar below screams insults, hoping for acknowledgement. If the emperor descends to argue, he legitimizes the beggar. But if he turns away, if he treats the words as air, then the beggar shrinks before the eyes of the crowd. Power is not proven by how loudly you answer, but by how little you need to. This is what makes Law 36 one of the most difficult and most liberating laws of power. It requires restraint in the face of hunger. It demands silence in the face of slander. It asks you to renounce the very fuel your enemies hope you will give them. Disdain what you cannot have. Ignore it, and it dies. Ignore it, and you grow. Ignore it, and you wound your enemy more deeply than you ever could with rage. This is the essence of the law, and to see it most clearly, we must go deeper into the machinery of human desire, into the psychology of why ignoring works, and then into the stories of those who mastered this law across history. The year was 117 CE, and the Roman Empire stood at its largest extent. Trajan, called Optimus Princeps, the best ruler, had carried the eagles of Rome deep into the east. His legions had crossed deserts and rivers, battering the ancient cities of Mesopotamia into submission. Dazzling victories filled the Senate with pride and the streets with parades. The empire stretched now from the Atlantic to the Persian Gulf, a map so swollen with red that it seemed to contain the world itself. But beneath the splendor lay fragility. The new provinces were distant, rebellious and costly to hold. Supply lines stretched thin across barren lands. Local populations, unassimilated and resentful, rose in revolt as soon as the legions passed by. Rome could conquer swiftly, yes, but to govern, that was another matter. Into this storm stepped Hadrian, Trajan's adopted heir. He was no reckless conqueror. He was a man of architecture, a lover of philosophy, a soldier who preferred the discipline of order over the intoxication of victory. And when Trajan died, Hadrian inherited not just the crown, but the impossible question: should Rome keep chasing what it could not hold? Imagine the weight of the moment. The Senate clamored for glory. Generals dreamed of crowns. Citizens hungered for triumphs, for spoils, for new spectacles in the Colosseum. To withdraw would look like weakness. To abandon what Rome had just bled for would tarnish Trajan's legacy. But Hadrian saw with clearer eyes. He recognized that appetite has no end. Empires that expand without discipline collapse under their own gluttony. He chose disdain. Against the pressure of tradition, against the insults whispered in marble halls, Hadrian ordered the legions to retreat. Mesopotamia was abandoned. Eastern conquests, won with so much blood, were given up. Cities that had just been paraded as trophies were left behind. The backlash was fierce. Voices in the Senate called him timid. Old soldiers muttered that Rome's greatness was shrinking. Whisperers accused him of betraying Trajan's conquests, of dishonoring the gods of victory. Yet Hadrian did not answer them. He gave no speeches to justify himself. He did not duel in the theater of pride. He disdained their hunger for endless conquest. Instead, he turned to the art of preservation. He strengthened the borders. He reformed the administration. He toured the empire, not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. Where Trajan had stretched, Hadrian consolidated. Where Trajan had burned brightly, Hadrian chose endurance. Most famously, he built walls. In the windswept north of Britain, where tribes pressed hard against Rome's limits, Hadrian commanded the construction of a vast barrier, mile after mile of stone, cut across the island, an unbroken line that declared to friend and foe alike, this far, no further. It was not just a wall of stone. It was a wall of philosophy. It was the embodiment of Law 36. For what is a wall if not disdain made visible, a refusal to chase what lies beyond, a monument to the wisdom of turning away? Think of the psychology here. Rome had always glorified expansion, its stories, its myths, its very identity was tied to conquest. By refusing to feed that hunger, Hadrian risked scorn. Yet in that very scorn lay his strength. He proved that true sovereignty is not to chase every prize, but to choose which prizes matter. And in time, history vindicated him. His reign became known as one of stability, of consolidation, of beauty. While the critics of his day shouted, his silence starved them. While they clamored for distant lands, his wall endured for centuries. Hadrian teaches us this, that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in the charge, but in the refusal. That to disdain is to see beyond appetite, to protect what can be held, rather than to exhaust oneself on what cannot. Hadrian's reign was not without darkness. He could be cruel. He could be jealous. He persecuted those who threatened him. Yet on this question, the question of appetite, he showed discipline rare in history, and it is that discipline, not Trajan's glory, that preserved Rome for another 100 years. Law 36 breathes in Hadrian's stone. The emperor who turned away from conquest carved disdain into the earth itself. His wall still stands, not as a ruin, but as a reminder. There is dignity in restraint, and empire in saying no. The Third Crusade. The very words summon visions of banners whipping in the wind, of mail-clad knights riding under crosses, of drums and trumpets sounding across the Levant. To the Christians of Europe, it was a holy expedition to reclaim Jerusalem. To the Muslims of the East, it was yet another invasion, another flood of armored men pouring across their shores. And at the center of it all stood two figures, men so different in style that their rivalry became legend. Richard Plantagenet, known to history as Richard the Lionheart, King of England, and Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known simply as Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria. Richard was fire, bold, theatrical, hungry for glory. He loved displays of courage, dramatic charges, grand duels. He understood the power of theater, and he wielded it like a weapon. When he wrote to Saladin, his letters dripped with taunts and challenges. He demanded personal combat, as if the fate of kingdoms could be settled by spectacle. He staged his campaigns with the flair of a knight-errant, conscious always of the songs that would be sung of him back in Europe. Saladin was water, calm, steady, flowing around obstacles instead of crashing into them. He understood patience, logistics, the slow grind of endurance. He cared little for theater. He was a man of faith, of discipline, of long horizons, and he understood Law 36 intuitively, that to respond to every insult is to give your enemy the dignity of your attention. Consider the psychology of their duel. Richard wanted Saladin to rage. He wanted him pulled onto a stage where Richard's courage could shine brightest. He wanted to feed his own legend by dragging Saladin into personal combat. But Saladin refused. When Richard hurled insults, Saladin answered with gifts. When Richard fell ill, Saladin sent him his personal physicians. When Richard challenged him to duels, Saladin smiled and turned his attention to fortresses, to rivers, to the bread and water of war. This was not cowardice. It was disdain. Saladin looked at Richard's provocations and saw them for what they were. Bait. To answer would be to elevate Richard, to make him the equal he so desperately wanted to be. By ignoring him, Saladin diminished him. Picture the camps of the Crusaders. Around the fire, knights would whisper of Saladin's courtesy, his patience, his refusal to stoop to Richard's taunts. Even their chroniclers, men who hated him, could not help but respect him. They admitted that he was the greater sovereign, the calmer mind, the truer leader. Meanwhile, Richard burned himself out. He won battles, yes, but at terrible cost. He exhausted his men, his treasury, his body. In the end, he had no choice but to sail home, leaving Jerusalem still in Saladin's hands. The Lionheart returned to Europe a legend, but a weary one. Saladin remained Sultan. What lesson lies here? That dignity often lies not in the sword you draw, but in the sword you refuse. Saladin understood the deepest truth of Law 36, that the greatest insult to your enemy is not to curse them, not to duel them, not even to defeat them, but to ignore them, to behave as though their provocations are beneath you. In doing so, he robbed Richard of the one thing he craved most: acknowledgement. Richard had fire, yes, but Saladin had discipline, and history remembers the fire as a blaze that consumed itself, while the water endured. There's a story told of their negotiations. When Richard asked for terms, Saladin did not gloat. He did not mock. He agreed with courtesy. This too was disdain, not the contempt of mockery, but the loftier contempt of calm. For Saladin knew that the man who smiles in the face of insult wounds deeper than the one who shouts. In Saladin's silence, in his patience, in his refusal to dignify Richard's theater, we see Law 36 alive. He starved the English king of the very oxygen he craved. He let him rage, and by not answering, he let him burn out. Disdain can wear many masks: stone walls in Britain, silence in Beijing. But in Saladin's hands, it wore the mask of courtesy. A courtesy so steady, so unshakable, that it became the sharpest weapon of all. Beijing, mid-19th century. The Forbidden City loomed with its endless courtyards, its vermilion walls, its silence broken only by the shuffle of silk slippers and the rustle of memorial scrolls. At its center, behind golden doors and layers of protocol, lived a woman whose name would one day command fear and fascination in equal measure: Empress Dowager Cixi. She had risen from the shadows. Once a low-ranking concubine, chosen for the emperor's bed when she was barely a teenager, she became the mother of the only surviving son of Emperor Xianfeng. And when that emperor died, leaving a child on the throne, she maneuvered with precision and ruthlessness to become regent. A woman in a world of men, a former concubine ruling an empire of hundreds of millions. Her very existence at the pinnacle of power was scandal, and scandal became the weapon her enemies turned against her. Whispers spread through the court. Pamphlets circulated in the streets. She was accused of extravagance, of wasting silver on jewels and gardens while the empire bled. She was accused of cruelty, of silencing rivals with poison and exile. She was accused of debauchery, of lovers smuggled through palace corridors, of secret indulgences hidden behind curtains. In any other dynasty, such rumors could have destroyed a ruler. In China, where legitimacy rested not only on power, but on the mandate of heaven, the perception of moral authority. Such slanders were dangerous fire. One spark could ignite rebellion. What did Cixi do? Did she summon her ministers and thunder denials? Did she order trials to punish the gossips? Did she scourge the pamphleteers in the streets? Number. She did nothing. When foreign diplomats mentioned the whispers, she smiled lightly, as though they were beneath notice. When courtiers repeated them, she waved her hand and returned to the business of state. When pamphlets reached her chambers, she did not even have them read aloud. She simply ignored them. This silence was not ignorance. It was strategy. She understood Law 36 instinctively, that to answer is to dignify. To fight gossip is to breathe life into it. To rage at rumor is to multiply its audience. But to disdain it, to starve it of attention, is to let it wither. Consider the psychology at play. Gossip as a parasite. It requires the host's reaction to survive. If Cixi had raged, the whispers would have grown into a storm. By refusing to care, she suffocated them. She turned scandal into silence, and while the gossips fumed, she built. She expanded the arsenals. She pushed for railroads and telegraphs. She modernized the navy. She maneuvered against foreign powers with skill that even her critics admitted was formidable. She preserved the dynasty through rebellions and invasions, through humiliation at the hands of Europe and Japan, through storms that could have shattered the empire completely. Think of this. Cixi ruled, in one form or another, for nearly half a century. Ministers came and went, generals rose and fell, but she endured, and she endured because she understood what few rulers ever grasp, that silence can be a throne, and disdain can be armor. Her enemies never stopped whispering. To this day, her reputation is clouded with rumor, some of it true, much of it not. But history itself bears witness to her power. No concubine should have been able to rise so high. No woman in that age should have been able to rule so long. And yet she did, not by feeding the gossips, but by starving them. There is a lesson here for anyone who has ever been slandered, anyone who has ever been the subject of whispering campaigns. The instinct is always to answer, to explain, to defend. But every word you give your enemy is a coin in their purse. Cixi gave them nothing, and so, in time, they grew poor. Her disdain was not arrogance, it was calculation, and in it, we see Law 36 not as theory, but as survival. Hadrian, Saladin, Cixi, three names separated by oceans, by centuries, by language and empire, and yet all three carried within them the same weapon, the same discipline, the same secret, the ability to disdain what could not be held. Hadrian inherited an empire swollen with victories. The easy path would have been to keep chasing conquest, to ride the wave of glory even as it carried Rome into exhaustion. But Hadrian dared to step back. He looked at the map not with the eyes of appetite, but with the eyes of discipline. He abandoned what could not be sustained, and in doing so, he preserved what could. He built walls, visible, permanent symbols of refusal. And in those stones, we see that sometimes the most powerful empire is built not by saying yes to everything, but by saying no at the right time. Saladin faced an opponent who craved theater, a king who wanted to drag him into duels and dramas that would make him a legend. Richard the Lionheart lived for applause, for the roar of crowds, for the songs of bards. To engage with him on his stage would have been to give him the crown he wanted most. But Saladin, calm as water, refused the performance. He ignored the insults, smiled at the taunts, and starved the theater of its air. When Richard burned out, Saladin remained. He proved that the sharpest answer to fire is not always fire, but silence. And Cixi, Empress Dowager of China, her entire reign was haunted by whispers, accusations of cruelty, of debauchery, of corruption. Each rumor was a test, a provocation, a chance to react. And yet she never did. She smiled. She dismissed. She turned her attention instead to the machinery of empire, to railroads, arsenals, reforms. She outlasted them all. By refusing to dignify rumor, she became larger than it. Her silence was not weakness. It was dominance. Together, these stories reveal the heart of Law 36. To disdain is to invert the script. When your enemies expect you to rage, you smile. When they bait you to chase, you turn away. When they throw fire at your name, you refuse to bring oil. You break the pattern. You seize the initiative not by striking, but by not striking. This law is not passive. Do not confuse it with surrender. Hadrian did not surrender. He preserved. Saladin did not surrender. He endured. Cixi did not surrender. She ruled for nearly half a century. Disdain is active starvation. It is the deliberate act of withholding what your enemy needs most. Your energy, your attention, your recognition. Think of how power truly works. The crowd looks not at what you say, but at what you choose not to say. They measure not only your victories, but your silences. To fight every battle is to appear desperate. To fight only the necessary battles is to appear sovereign. And to ignore a battle entirely, to look beyond it as if it were dust on the wind, is to appear untouchable. There is a deeper psychology here. Human beings crave acknowledgement. The gossip wants you to rage, because rage is proof they exist. The rival wants you to strike, because combat makes them your equal. The slanderer wants you to explain, because explanation confirms the wound. By refusing, by disdaining, you deny them existence itself. You erase them in the eyes of the world. And that is the deepest wound of all. Ask yourself, how many empires, how many leaders, how many ordinary lives have been destroyed not by what was lost, but by the inability to let go, by the obsession with the unattainable, the forbidden, the insult that could not be forgotten. Desire can enslave, insult can consume, rumor can devour, but only if you feed them. Hadrian teaches us the wisdom of boundaries. There are some things not worth chasing. Preserve what is within your walls. Disdain what lies beyond. Saladin teaches us the wisdom of patience. Some opponents thrive on spectacle. The only way to defeat them is to refuse the stage. Cixi teaches us the wisdom of silence. Not every word deserves an answer. Some enemies die faster when ignored than when attacked. This is the paradox of Law 36. The greatest revenge is not conquest, not fury, not spectacle. The greatest revenge is to leave your enemy craving your attention and never giving it. Imagine the scene. A rival screams your name, desperate for your response. The crowd leans in, waiting for your words, and you smile, turn your head, and continue walking. In that moment, the rival shrinks. The crowd wonders why you did not care, and your silence echoes louder than any shout could. Power is not in how many battles you fight. Power is in how many battles you refuse. And so, remember this, the world will tempt you. It will wave prizes in your face that you cannot have. It will whisper insults to pull you into fights. It will dangle forbidden fruit until your mouth waters. But your dignity, your throne, lies in disdain. Ignore what you cannot have. and you will find that the world itself bends toward you. Because the man who fights every insult dies by exhaustion. The woman who chases every rumor drowns in noise. The empire that seeks every prize collapses under its own hunger. But the one who disdains, the one who ignores, the one who starves the trivial, he endures, she endures, they endure. And in the end, that endurance is the sharpest blade of all. Law 36. Disdain what you cannot have. Ignoring it is the best revenge. Like, subscribe, comment, or don't. You are the master of your own life.